At the doors of a nursing home, a skeptical manager sneers,
"What use is a therapy dog here?"
but when Keanu Reeves bows his head and whispers, "Give me 30 minutes, and if nothing changes, I'll walk away," no one could imagine the moment that would silence every doubt and change lives forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The front doors of the nursing home closed softly behind him, shutting out the noise of the street. Keanu Reeves stood still for a moment, his hand resting lightly on Luna's leash, giving her time to take in the new atmosphere. The air inside carried the mixed scents of antiseptic, floor polish, and faint traces of lavender from a diffuser nearby. Sunlight filtered through tinted windows, turning the corridor ahead into a pale stretch of yellow light. The hallway seemed longer than it was, a tunnel of quiet moments marked by photographs, wheelchairs, and the echoes of footsteps that came and went with the rhythm of care. Luna's ears twitched as her paws touched the smooth tile floor. She lowered her nose, sniffing carefully, moving at a slow, deliberate pace. Keanu whispered to her in a calm, reassuring tone, his voice barely louder than a breath. "Good. Steady. You're safe." His words weren't just for the dog. They were for himself, too. In this place where age, memory, and time clung to every wall, he needed to match the rhythm of the people who lived here. Rushing would shatter the fragile quiet. On his right, the wall displayed a row of corkboards filled with snapshots and fading cards. A photograph of a birthday party showed an old man in a paper hat, smiling shyly at a cake topped with too many candles to count. A Christmas card, with glitter still clinging to its surface, leaned beside it. Next to that, a photograph of a family reunion, smiles wide, though the paper edges curled from years of pinning. Each picture seemed to whisper, "Remember me," holding moments frozen while the people inside the rooms fought daily battles against time. Luna paused near a wheelchair, parked beside the wall. Its seat cushion was worn, one wheel slightly scuffed as if it had bumped against the same corner many times. Keanu crouched briefly, giving Luna a chance to sniff the chair's frame. She wagged her tail once, lightly, then continued forward. He allowed her to guide the pace, resisting any urge to pull or hurry. Her body language told him she was adjusting, measuring the silence, weighing the new scents of medicine and old linen. On the doors leading into the rooms, charts were clipped neatly into holders. Keanu slowed to glance at one. Names, birth dates, medication schedules, rows of numbers and reminders lined each sheet. They were lifelines of precision, holding back chaos one pill at a time. He thought of the nurses who had to keep track of them all, of the pressure of forgetting nothing, of the exhaustion of answering every call light. These charts were more than paper. They were the heartbeat of this hallway. Beside one doorway, a vase held wilted carnations, their petals turning brown at the edges. Next to them, a handwritten note, "Happy anniversary, Mom. We love you." The handwriting was shaky, perhaps from a child or a grown son who could not bear to see his mother in such a place. Keanu felt a flicker of ache. He knew what absence felt like, how fragile these small gestures were. Even a fading flower was a declaration that someone still cared. As Luna stopped near the vase, sniffing the petals, Keanu smiled faintly. "Memories have a scent," he murmured. Luna wagged her tail again, a quiet acknowledgement. He stood, straightened his shoulders, and allowed himself another slow breath. His stride was gentle, never more than a few steps at a time, as though each movement was part of a silent performance where silence itself mattered more than speed. Further down the hall, a nurse in light blue scrubs hurried past with a tray of medications, eyes focused, hands steady despite her fatigue. She gave Keanu a quick nod, then vanished into a room. He noticed the circles under her eyes, the lines of stress etched too early across her young face. She had likely been running since dawn, and she would not stop until her shift ended. Every detail pressed against him: the photographs, the faded cards, the wheelchairs, the medication charts. Each one carried the weight of someone's story. Every door represented a private struggle. To the residents inside, The hallway was a stage they rarely left, a passageway lined with memories they could no longer hold tightly. The fragility of life hung in the air, visible in the small things that most people would pass by without seeing. Keanu's pace never quickened. He knew the hallway was more than a corridor. It was a living testament to time and care. He wanted Luna to feel it too, to adjust to the rhythm of slowness. A hallway like this did not welcome noise or rushing. It demanded respect for silence, and in that silence, something fragile yet powerful waited to be healed. Luna's paws clicked softly against the tile as she continued her slow exploration. Every few steps she paused, nose twitching, ears lifting toward the faintest of sounds. Somewhere far down the hall, a television murmured with the drone of an afternoon news report. From another room came a cough, followed by the squeak of bed rails being adjusted. The nursing home breathed in these small noises, a fragile orchestra of human presence. Keanu adjusted his stride to hers, patient, deliberate. His hand rested loosely on the leash, never tugging, never forcing. He knew that Luna's sense of safety would set the tone for the residents she would meet. If she walked calmly, they would feel calm. If she startled, their own unease would rise. This was not a performance to be rushed, but a dance that required careful listening. They passed another bulletin board, where a child's crayon drawing had been pinned with pride. The crooked lines formed a smiling sun, and beneath it were stick figures holding hands. In the corner, written in uneven letters, the words, "To Grandma." Keanu slowed, letting his eyes linger. The picture was simple, almost clumsy, but it carried more weight than any polished painting. It was proof that someone had taken time to remember, to love. He glanced down at Luna, who sniffed near the drawing, then looked up at him expectantly. He smiled, whispering again, "Good, steady, you're safe." The words seemed to soak into the air, a gentle mantra carrying through the hallway. For the first time since stepping inside, Keanu noticed a door cracked open just enough to reveal the shadow of someone sitting in a chair. The resident's head tilted slightly, as though listening. The moment was delicate, unspoken. Something inside this hallway was beginning to shift. The hallway stretched ahead like a quiet river, each door a shoreline where stories waited to be touched. Keanu let Luna guide him closer to the cracked doorway, where the shadow lingered. He slowed his breathing, keeping his steps soft, almost inaudible, as though any sudden motion might disturb the fragile balance inside. The door creaked wider, with the faintest push of air. Inside, the figure of an elderly man sat slouched in a chair, his eyes half closed. His hands rested loosely on the armrests, fingers twitching now and then as if chasing memories in his sleep. Keanu didn't step inside. He simply allowed Luna to pause near the threshold, giving the man space. Luna sniffed, then sat, her tail brushing lightly against the tile. Keanu lowered himself to one knee, positioning his body lower than Luna's so that the dog's presence would be the focus. He whispered again, almost like a lullaby. "Steady, safe, you're all right." The man stirred, opening his eyes a fraction. His gaze landed on Luna. For a brief moment, the man's lips parted, as though recognition had surfaced from some hidden corner of his memory. Then his eyes closed again, but the faint twitch in his fingers stilled. Keanu stayed crouched until Luna exhaled slowly and lowered her head to the ground, a sign that she had settled. Only then did he rise, guiding her gently onward. He knew this hallway would test patience at every turn, but that was the point. Healing here wasn't about miracles shouted from rooftops. It was about quiet ripples, one breath, one glance, one gentle pause at a time. The hallway's stillness broke suddenly. A sharp, buzzing alarm blared at the front entrance as the delivery man pushed through with stacked crates of medical supplies. The sound ricocheted off the walls, jarring against the fragile calm Keanu had been nurturing with Luna. The dog's ears shot up, tail stiff, her body tightening with alertness. She didn't bark, but her sudden shift mirrored the invisible ripple of tension that swept the corridor. Keanu stopped in place, his body lowering slightly, one hand pressing gently against Luna's side. "Steady," he whispered, his tone calm and even. He didn't try to overpower the alarm with volume. Instead, he slowed his breath, letting his shoulders drop, exhaling in a way that Luna had been trained to mirror. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the source of the noise, but then looked back at him. His stillness gave her permission to release hers. Just as the alarm ceased with a final electronic chirp, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Nurse Tom appeared, rushing forward, his shoes squeaking as he skidded slightly on the polished floor. His face was flushed, his arms full of folders and syringes tucked into a tray balanced precariously against his chest. Sorry, Tom muttered as he brushed past. He gave a fleeting glance toward Keanu, his expression a mix of apology and exhaustion, before hurrying toward a patient's room. The air seemed to hold its breath as Tom disappeared behind the door, leaving only the faint creak of hinges in his wake. Miss Carla emerged from a side corridor at that exact moment. Her eyes swept the hallway, landing squarely on Keanu and the dog beside him. Her expression hardened. "Don't mess things up with your show," she said under her breath, though her voice carried enough to strike like a whip. Her arms folded tightly across her chest, shoulders squared, every line of her posture dripping with skepticism. Keanu didn't respond with defense. Instead, he lowered his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her with the same measured calm he had shown Luna. His voice was soft, but steady enough to fill the space without raising tension. "Let's keep the tempo slow," he said. He wasn't speaking only to her, he was setting the rhythm for everyone who might overhear, for the staff rushing, for the residents listening behind their doors, and for Luna, whose eyes followed his every move. The moment carried weight. The alarm had tested the fragile quiet of the nursing home, and the tension in Carla's words tested his resolve. Yet Keanu chose not to fight tension with more tension. He answered chaos with pace, with deliberate rhythm. His power didn't come from pushing louder, but from pulling everything slower. The echo of Carla's remark lingered in the hallway like a shadow. Her words weren't just aimed at Keanu, they carried into the walls, to the staff who passed by, and the residents who might have overheard. Doubt could spread as quickly as panic in a place like this. Keanu adjusted his footing, steady as a stone in a rushing river. He bent at the waist just slightly, his hand brushing Luna's fur in slow, rhythmic strokes. Each motion matched the beat of his breath. Inhale, glide the hand down, exhale, glide again. Luna's taut shoulders eased. Her tail gave one cautious wag, then another, until the tension that had rippled through her body began to dissolve. He glanced toward Carla. She didn't move closer. Her arms were still folded, her mouth pressed in a thin line, but her eyes flickered for a moment, catching the subtle change in the dog's body language. What she saw contradicted what she believed. She expected chaos, but here was calm. She expected disruption, but instead the pace slowed. A door creaked open nearby. An elderly woman leaned her head into the hall, her hair neatly tied back with a pink ribbon. Her eyes darted to Luna, then to Keanu, curiosity softening her face. Keanu raised one hand in a quiet greeting, not with the exuberance of someone trying to make a show, but with the tenderness of someone acknowledging her presence as valuable. She smiled faintly, then retreated into her room, closing the door with a soft click. Nurse Tom returned only minutes later, moving just as quickly as before, but this time, his eyes caught Keanu's posture. He slowed instinctively, his footsteps less hurried as he passed. He offered a small nod that seemed to carry more meaning than words, an acknowledgement that someone was setting a different rhythm here, a rhythm the hallway sorely needed. Keanu spoke softly, almost as if addressing the hallway itself rather than any one person. When things speed up too fast, people hold their breath. When we slow down, they breathe again. His hand remained steady on Luna, his eyes calm, his breathing deliberately slow. It wasn't a lecture, it was a demonstration. Carla's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. She turned slightly, as though preparing to walk away, but her feet didn't move. Some part of her remained anchored there, pulled by a conflict she didn't want to admit the evidence that something subtle was working. Keanu stayed where he was, patient, unhurried. He knew that trust in this place wouldn't be won through arguments or credentials. It would be won by the tempo of a breath, by the quiet proof of peace in a hallway where alarms and rushing had become the normal language. Silence returned slowly, as if the walls themselves needed time to settle after the sudden shock of noise. Luna stood beside Keanu, calmer now, her head slightly lowered but her eyes watchful. She had felt the alarm, the rush of footsteps, the sharp edges of voices, yet she had followed his lead back to stillness. Carla finally uncrossed her arms, her hands falling to her sides in a reluctant gesture that betrayed more than she intended. She tried to mask it with a cough, but Keanu noticed. He didn't confront her. Instead, he turned slightly toward Luna, crouched, and let her sniff his open palm. It was a signal to everyone watching, even those behind half-open doors, that calm could be reintroduced with simple, steady gestures. One of the orderlies wheeled a cart past, eyes darting toward the dog before looking away quickly. Keanu didn't move aside in haste. He simply guided Luna a step back, keeping her close to the wall. He let the orderly pass, offering a small nod, then returned to the center of the hallway with the same unhurried pace. His movement suggested one thing above all else. This space belonged not to noise and rushing, but to rhythm and breathing. Behind one closed door, a faint voice muttered something unintelligible. A television clicked louder. From another room, the sound of laughter drifted briefly into the hall, carried by two visitors who soon left through the side exit. All of these sounds blended into the background, no longer sharp intrusions but pieces of the nursing home's living fabric. Keanu noted them without reacting, allowing Luna to understand through his steadiness that not every sound required fear. He straightened and looked down the corridor, his voice low but firm enough to travel. "Let's keep the tempo slow." It was not a command. It was a reminder, offered to anyone who needed it, the nurses, the staff, even Carla. The phrase hung in the air, plain and undeniable, a thread that tied back to what he had just shown. Carla exhaled audibly, her lips pressing together in thought. She didn't speak again, but her expression carried something different now. She had come ready to dismiss him with one sharp sentence, ready to prove him out of place. Yet she had witnessed what even an alarm and rushing footsteps could not undo, his ability to slow the storm rather than fuel it. As Keanu began to walk further into the hallway, Luna padding beside him with a steadier gait, the moment left its mark. The first test had come without warning, and it had passed. The tempo of the place had shifted, however slightly, and though few would admit it aloud, even the skeptics felt the subtle change in their own breathing. Keanu paused outside the next doorway, glancing at the name on the chart clipped neatly into the holder. Alice, it read in careful script, followed by her date of birth, medication times, and a short note written by staff. Sometimes confused, enjoys music. He drew in a steady breath, then crouched for a moment to meet Luna's eyes. The dog's tail tapped softly against the floor. She was ready, but Keanu knew that readiness here wasn't about excitement. It was about gentleness, patience, and silence strong enough to hold fragile memories. The door creaked open quietly, and the room revealed itself. Soft light spilled in through half-closed curtains, dust drifting lazily in its path. In the corner near the window, Alice sat in a cushioned chair, wrapped in a pale blanket that slipped from her shoulders. Her hair, thin and wispy, framed her face in loose curls. She stared toward the window, as though waiting for someone who might walk through it, her hands folded on her lap with a stillness that suggested both fragility and longing. Keanu stepped inside slowly, careful not to let the weight of his presence disrupt the delicate calm. He lowered himself so that his height would not overshadow her. Luna padded forward gently, her nails clicking softly against the floor before she stopped a safe distance away. Keanu guided her with a faint hand signal to sit. She obeyed instantly, her posture quiet, her eyes watchful. Alice's gaze shifted, uncertain at first, drawn by the slight movement in the room. Her brow furrowed, lips pressing together in confusion. Keanu bowed his head slightly, offering her the respect of silence before he spoke. His voice came low, as warm as he could make it, not demanding recognition, but inviting it. "Hello," "Alice," he said softly, "this is Luna. She's just here to sit with you." Alice blinked, her expression caught between hesitation and curiosity. Her eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Keanu, then to the window. Again, Keanu didn't push. He let the silence settle for a moment, allowing her to decide whether to let them in. He remained crouched, his knees bent lower than her chair, his body language smaller, deferential. Then he asked, almost as if he were remembering with her instead of prompting her, "Did you ever bake molasses?" The question seemed to float in the air, and for a moment there was no reply. Alice's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. But something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition sparking in the quiet confusion. She tilted her head, her lips parting again. "He liked cinnamon," she whispered. Her voice cracked but carried, fragile as a thread. "Always cinnamon." Keanu's chest tightened at the tender clarity breaking through her fog. Luna, as if sensing the shift, leaned back slightly and raised her head, offering her shoulder. Alice's eyes moved down slowly, and her trembling hand lifted from the blanket. She reached toward Luna, tentative, pausing halfway as though doubting her own ability. Alice's hand lingered in the air, shaking with effort, suspended between fear and desire. Keanu didn't move closer, didn't rush to guide her. He simply placed his hand flat against Luna's back, steady and calm, as if to show Alice that the dog was safe, steady, patient. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her choice. Finally, with a trembling exhale, Alice allowed her hand to settle onto Luna's shoulder. The dog did not flinch. She leaned back slightly, pressing into the touch as if to reassure Alice that she belonged here, in this moment, not lost in the haze of confusion. Alice's thin fingers curled into the soft fur, stroking once, then again. Her lips trembled, but her eyes softened, as though the act of touch had opened a locked door inside her. "My Henry," she whispered, eyes distant but full of something Keanu recognized. He always came in smelling of cinnamon. The kitchen would be so warm. "I used to bake bread, cakes, molasses cookies when the weather turned cold." The words tumbled slowly, halting but rich with memory. Her hand remained steady now, moving rhythmically through Luna's coat. The monitor by her chair, steady in its blinking light, began to show a subtle change, her blood pressure easing downward, her pulse leveling. Keanu lowered his head, as though listening to a sacred hymn. He did not interrupt her with comments or praise. Instead, he let her voice fill the silence, allowed her to be the teacher in the room, carrying everyone back into her world of ovens and cinnamon, of warmth and family. Alice blinked suddenly and looked directly at Keanu, as though seeing him clearly for the first time. "Do you know the smell?" she asked. "Yes," he said softly. "I know the smell of cinnamon. It feels like home." Her smile quivered into being, faint but genuine. She nodded, her eyes glistening. She reached for the small folded handkerchief on her lap, lifting it slowly. She pressed it to her nose, inhaling deeply, as though even the faintest trace of spice hidden in its fibers could carry her back. Luna rested her head against Alice's leg, her eyes closing, a picture of trust. The residents' breathing slowed to match the dog's, both of them tethered to the rhythm Keanu had been weaving since stepping through the door. Outside in the hallway, faint footsteps paused as someone listened near the door. The shift was noticeable even beyond the walls inside this room. Something was happening that no medication chart could capture. A fragile memory had been restored through a scent, a touch, and the steadiness of presence. Alice kept the handkerchief near her face, her fragile fingers clutching it with surprising strength. The fabric was worn thin, edges fraying, but its value was beyond measure. It was her anchor, the thread that tied her present to her past. She inhaled again, eyes closing, lips moving as if silently, reciting a recipe only she could remember. "Sometimes the smallest things bring us back," he said, "like cinnamon." Her eyes opened, watery now, but bright in a way they hadn't been moments earlier. She gave a soft laugh, more breath than sound. Henry used to tease me, she murmured. Said my cookies could keep the winter away. He'd sneak them from the cooling tray before they set. She shook her head gently, the smile staying this time. He was always like that, always hungry for sweetness. Luna shifted her weight, pressing closer against Alice's leg. The woman's trembling hand stroked her shoulder again, this time with more confidence, the earlier hesitation gone. The room seemed lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. The monitor's gentle beeping confirmed what was plain to see. Her blood pressure had lowered, her body relaxing, as memory replaced anxiety. Keanu allowed the silence to expand, giving Alice space to linger in her memory. This was not a place for instruction or fixing. It was a place for presence. After a long pause, he reached into his pocket and took out a small card he had folded there. On it were 3 hand-drawn symbols he often carried when working with therapy dogs. Sit, stay, look at me. But at the bottom, he had scribbled a single line in his own handwriting. Slow is fast for the heart. He left it on the small table beside her chair, placing it where she or a nurse could see later. Alice noticed the movement, her eyes flicking toward it, then back to him. She didn't ask about the words, but her gaze lingered on the note, as though something about the quiet phrase resonated with her, without needing explanation. When Luna finally laid down fully, her head resting across Alice's foot, the woman gave a soft gasp of delight. She trusts me, she whispered. Yes, Keanu replied, his tone certain. She trusts you. The handkerchief slipped from Alice's lap as she continued to stroke Luna. Keanu picked it up carefully, folding it and placing it gently back in her hands. Hold on to this, he said. It carries him back to you. Alice clutched the handkerchief once more, her eyes closing in peace. It had become a kitchen warmed by an oven, the air filled with the smell of cinnamon, the echo of laughter, and the steady beat of a heart rediscovering calm. When Keanu stepped back into the hallway with Luna at his side, the air carried a new quiet. The door to Alice's room closed gently behind him, and he knew the moment they had shared would ripple outward even if no one spoke of it. A figure was waiting nearby, Nurse Tom, shifting from one foot to the other, his tray now empty, his expression caught between curiosity and exhaustion. Tom's eyes darted toward the closed door, then back to Keanu. I don't know what you did in there, he admitted, voice low, but she looked different when I peeked through. Softer, calmer. That never happens. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He reached down to stroke Luna's head, steady and slow, then looked at Tom with quiet intention. It isn't magic, he said. It's rhythm. Breath sets the tempo for everything. Tom frowned, confused but intrigued. Breath? Keanu motioned for him to step aside, away from the steady stream of carts and passing staff. They stopped near a window where soft light touched the floor. Keanu removed his visitor's badge from his shirt pocket and clipped it to the sill, a signal that this moment mattered enough to pause for. Box breathing, Keanu explained, his tone even. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, then repeat. It's simple, but it resets the nervous system. It steadies you when everything else feels like it's pulling too fast. Tom chuckled nervously. I don't think I've breathed properly all day. Then start now, Keanu said, his voice calm but insistent. Breathing is the rope that ties the boat to the dock. Without it, you drift. With it, you stay steady, even in rough waters. Tom hesitated, then placed the tray against the wall and squared his shoulders. He nodded once, ready to follow. Keanu lifted his hand in gentle rhythm, signaling the pace. Inhale. His voice carried the count softly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tom drew in air, his chest lifting, his expression uncertain. Hold, Keanu continued, eyes steady on him. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tom's face tightened, unused to the pause, but he followed. Keanu motioned downward. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tom released, shoulders dropping, a faint flush in his cheeks. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. The cycle repeated. The second time, Tom's breaths deepened. The third time, his shoulders eased. By the fourth, his eyes were less frantic, his lips parted, as though he had just remembered something essential he had been neglecting. He exhaled with a shaky laugh. I feel different, like I was holding my breath all shift without realizing it. That's because you were, Keanu replied. Everyone here does. The stress never leaves room for air. But if you can breathe, you can anchor yourself. And when you anchor yourself, you anchor others. Tom leaned back against the wall, as if his body finally remembered it was allowed to rest. His hands hung loosely at his sides, no longer clenched around the invisible weight of responsibility he carried every hour. He shook his head slowly, his voice a whisper of wonder. Why don't they teach us this? They tell us how to chart every pill, how to move patients without hurting our backs, but not this, not how to breathe. Keanu studied him quietly, his expression unreadable but kind. Because breathing seems too simple, people want complicated answers, but the body doesn't heal from complication. It heals from rhythm, from steady signals. A calm breath tells the heart it doesn't need to fight anymore. Tom nodded, his throat tightening as if he was on the edge of admitting something he rarely said aloud. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning out here, running from one emergency to the next. I barely sleep. When I do, I dream I'm still working. Keanu didn't look away. He simply drew another breath, slow and measured, and Tom, almost unconsciously, mirrored him again. Their chests rose and fell in unison, and Luna shifted closer, sitting between them as if she too understood the rhythm they were trying to anchor. Outside, through the window, a distant honk pierced the air. A car horn from the street broke the quiet. Luna's ears perked instantly, body stiffening. Tom flinched too, shoulders tightening, as if the sound were another alarm demanding his attention. But Keanu's response was immediate. He lifted a hand, palm steady, his breath not changing pace. "Stay with the rope," he said calmly. His eyes stayed on Tom, not the window. Noise doesn't break you unless you let go. Breathe through it. Hold steady. Tom forced himself to inhale again, following the count Keanu had given him earlier. Luna, watching her handler's steady presence, lowered her ears, then exhaled in a soft whine before settling again. Tom's eyes widened at the timing. She breathed with us. Keanu nodded once, not smiling, but affirming, because she trusts the tempo. If I panic, she panics. If I breathe, she breathes. It's the same with people. The residents, the nurses, the families. They mirror what they feel around them. If you can hold calm, you give them a place to rest. The truth of it sank into Tom like water filling dry ground. This time, and he exhaled with purpose, he whispered, almost to himself, "Anchor the boat." Keanu let the words hang there. He didn't need to add anything more. The lesson had already taken root. The hallway quieted again, as though it too was learning to move at this slower tempo. Nurses passed at the far end, their footsteps quick, their voices low. But here, near the window with the soft light, the pace was different. Tom stood taller now, his shoulders no longer curved inward with fatigue. His breathing had lengthened, falling into a natural rhythm that steadied the tremor in his voice. Keanu studied him for a moment, then spoke with measured conviction. When you go into a resident's room, they'll know in the first 10 seconds if you're carrying chaos with you. They can feel your heartbeat in the way you set down a cup, the way you open the door. But if you breathe first, you change the entire space before you say a word. Tom swallowed, nodding slowly, as though the truth of it stung and healed at the same time. I never thought about it like that. I just rush, always rushing. Keanu's eyes softened. That's what this place teaches you. Rush or fall behind. But the people here don't need rush. They need rhythm. Luna, lying between them, shifted and gave a low sigh, the kind of sound dogs make when they've found comfort. Tom looked down at her, then back at Keanu. She's calmer than I am, he said with a faint smile. Because she's practiced, Keanu replied. And now you will be too. Box breathing isn't just for you, it's for them. Every time you anchor yourself, you tie someone else's boat to the dock. That's how you stop people from drifting too far. Tom closed his eyes, inhaled for 4, held for 4, exhaled for 4, held again. When he opened his eyes, they looked clearer, less frantic, as if the fog of exhaustion had lifted just a little. "I can do this," he murmured. "Even on the busiest shift." Keanu nodded once, especially then. From one of the nearby rooms, a faint laugh carried out into the hallway, followed by the muffled sound of a television game show. The normal sounds of the nursing home resumed, but they felt less intrusive now, less sharp. Tom noticed it too, and for the first time, he didn't flinch. He picked up his tray again, lighter in his hands than before. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I didn't realize I needed someone to remind me how to breathe." Keanu gave a simple answer, his tone steady and true. "We all forget. That's why we practice." Tom walked away, his pace slower than before, but his steps more certain. Keanu watched him go, then reached down to pat Luna's head. The hallway felt changed, as though the rhythm of calm had planted itself into its walls. The lesson was simple, but it would last. Keanu stopped at the next chart in the hallway. The name on the paper read Benjamin Harris, though the staff notes underneath used only Mr. Ben. His medical sheet carried a heavy history: tremors, insomnia, anxiety. A scribbled comment in the margin read, "Former veteran startled by loud noises." Keanu paused before opening the door, taking a measured breath. He touched Luna's head gently, preparing her for what they might step into. The door creaked open, and the room was dimmer than the others. The curtains were mostly closed, letting only thin blades of sunlight spill across the floor. In a chair near the bed sat a man in his late 70s, his shoulders broad but stooped, his face weathered by time and memory. His hands trembled visibly, resting on his thighs, and his eyes were fixed on the floor, avoiding the doorway as though eye contact itself might ignite something painful. Keanu guided Luna inside slowly, keeping her on a short leash but not pulling her forward. He crouched near the threshold, lowering his body in a gesture of respect, and allowed the silence to stretch before speaking. The tremors in Ben's hands continued, rhythmic, unrelenting, as though some unseen engine inside him refused to quiet. Keanu said nothing at first. He counted softly under his breath, not loud enough for words to intrude, but steady enough for Luna to feel the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. His breathing matched the pattern, his shoulders rising and falling with deliberate calm. Luna mirrored him, her chest rising in slow rhythm, her body language relaxed but attentive. "Mr." Ben finally lifted his gaze, not toward Keanu, but toward the dog at his side. His eyes flickered, sharp and guarded, then quickly darted away again. His lips pressed tight, his jaw stiffened. Keanu caught the hesitation, but did not bridge the gap. He stayed where he was, a respectful distance away, and let Ben set the pace. "I won't force you," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying no command. "We're just here, nothing else." Ben's breathing hitched slightly, almost a growl caught in his chest, but he didn't speak. His hands twitched harder for a moment, then stilled just enough for him to look again at Luna. The dog didn't move closer. She sat, tail tucked lightly around her paws, her eyes soft. She offered no demand, no bark, no whine, only patience. Keanu began the count again, this time a little louder, a little more deliberate. 1, 2, 3, 4. His gaze stayed on Luna as he spoke, letting Ben know the rhythm was for her as much as for him. Yet the cadence filled the room, subtle but steady, like the sound of distant waves. Ben's fingers twitched, curling into his palms, then loosening. His chest rose a little higher on the next breath, then fell heavier. His eyes darted toward Keanu again, but lingered this time before sliding back to the dog. The tremors didn't vanish, but they faltered. Something inside him was listening. Keanu stayed perfectly still, his breath steady, his voice absent of pressure. The rhythm of the count continued, filling the air like a quiet metronome. Luna shifted her weight slightly, lying down but keeping her head lifted, her eyes trained on Ben with that wordless patience that only animals seemed able to hold. Ben's hands shook harder for a moment, as though defying the calm being offered, but his eyes betrayed the truth he was watching. His gaze kept flicking back to Luna, pulled toward her stillness. It was not the stare of a man uninterested. It was the stare of someone afraid of what would happen if he allowed himself to feel. "You don't have to reach for her," Keanu murmured, his tone no louder than a whisper. "Just breathe with us, nothing more." Ben let out a bitter laugh, a sound caught between scorn and sorrow. "Breathing never stopped the noise," he muttered. His voice was gravelly, broken by years of holding pain. Too tightly. Keanu nodded, accepting the words without debate. "You're right. Breathing can't erase the noise, but it can keep you from drowning in it." His tone carried no lecture, only a simple truth. The veteran's jaw worked as though grinding invisible stones. His hands curled tighter, then relaxed. The tremors were still there, but their rhythm had changed, syncing faintly with the cadence of Keanu's breathing. Luna lowered her head to her paws at that exact moment, her body folding into rest. She gave a slow exhale, audible in the silence. The sound pulled Ben's eyes downward. He stared at her chest, rising and falling, the rhythm steady, unbothered by the invisible storms in his own head. Minutes passed, stretched thin but heavy. He allowed the silence to work, allowed Luna's presence to do what words could never force. Then, without warning, Ben's right hand lifted slightly. It hovered midair, shaking so hard it seemed as though the effort might snap it back. His breath hitched, and his eyes narrowed with the pain of the attempt. Keanu did not move to guide him. He only shifted slightly lower, his voice dropping again into the rhythm of the count. 1, 2, 3, 4. The numbers wrapped around the moment, like rope around a drifting vessel. Ben's hand wavered closer, stopping, then pulling back an inch. His teeth clenched, his left hand tightened on the chair arm, knuckles white. The struggle was visible, raw, like watching a man wrestle with something greater than himself. Finally, his hand extended forward again, inch by inch, until it hovered just above Luna's shoulder. The dog stayed perfectly still. Not a twitch, not a flinch, only her warm presence, waiting. Ben's hand trembled above Luna's fur, suspended in the space between fear and surrender. His breath stuttered, catching against the weight of memories that pressed on him like a vice. The silence in the room deepened, charged, as though the air itself was holding vigil for his decision. Then, with a slow, almost broken motion, his fingertips touched her. At first, it was just the lightest brush, barely contact at all, but the moment his skin grazed her shoulder, something shifted. His hand stopped shaking. The tremors that had dominated his body for years fell still, as if the simple touch had rewired the rhythm inside him. Ben's eyes widened. His chest heaved with a sharp inhale, not from fear, but from the shock of stillness. His other hand, gripping the chair, loosened slowly, releasing the tightness it had carried. He stared at Luna's fur beneath his fingers, his lips parting as if searching for words, but none came. Luna leaned gently into his touch, pressing just enough to assure him that the connection was real. She did not move otherwise. She didn't wag her tail or seek affection. She simply accepted him. The room, for the first time in years, seemed to hold peace within its walls. Keanu stayed crouched, watching, not breaking the moment with explanations or praise. His eyes softened, and when he finally spoke, it was only a whisper. "Okay, let's leave it like that." The words floated gently into the space, not as instruction, but as permission for Ben to stop here, to savor this single powerful victory without needing to do more. No one else spoke. Even the hum of the machine seemed quieter, the air reverent. It was the kind of silence that pressed into the chest, that carried weight heavier than sound. Ben's eyes glistened as he blinked rapidly, unwilling to let the tears fall. He swallowed hard, keeping his hand on Luna, as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. Yet the stillness of his fingers told the truth. For the first time in a long while, his body had remembered how to rest. Keanu remained there a moment longer, steady, allowing Ben to own the silence and the healing it carried. Then, slowly, he guided Luna to lower herself fully at Ben's feet. She settled. There, her warm body an anchor against the cold tides of memory. The moment was small in appearance, but inside this dim room, it was monumental. A man haunted by war had found stillness in a single touch. And in that stillness, the seeds of peace had been planted. The moment in Mr. Ben's room had left the hallway hushed, as if the stillness inside had seeped outward into the air. Keanu stepped out slowly, Luna walking beside him, her movements measured after such a delicate exchange. Nurse Tom was waiting down the hall, his face still carrying the quiet awe of what he had witnessed. He opened his mouth to speak, but the world outside cut him off. A siren wailed suddenly, shrill and piercing, breaking through the calm like a blade. The sound grew louder by the second as an ambulance barreled past on the street just outside the nursing home. The windows rattled from the force of it. Luna froze instantly, ears high, her body tense, tail rigid. Her eyes darted toward the noise, her muscles quivering with the instinct to bolt. "Luna," Keanu said softly, steady but firm. His hand lifted, index finger extended, pointing slightly downward toward the floor. It was the signal he had trained into her. Focus here, not there. She hesitated, her body trembling, but his calm presence anchored her. Tom, however, panicked. "She's going to spook." His voice rose as he stepped forward, hands out as if to grab her leash. His own breath quickened, chest heaving, eyes wide. The siren hit its peak as the ambulance screamed directly past the building, the red lights flashing across the walls like fire. Keanu raised his free hand toward Tom without even looking at him, palm out in a gesture of reassurance. "Wait," he said, calm but commanding. "Don't add more noise." The siren's echoes rolled through the corridor, bouncing off every surface. Luna whined softly, shifting her weight from paw to paw. Keanu lowered his hand closer to her eye level, his finger still. Steady, his tone even. "Target." He tapped his chest lightly, giving her a point of focus. She flicked her eyes toward him, uncertain, then back toward the window. "Here, Luna. Target." His voice was soft but unwavering. Slowly, she shifted her gaze back to his finger, her trembling easing just slightly. Keanu reached into his pocket with his other hand and pulled out Alice's handkerchief, still faintly scented with cinnamon. He held it close to Luna's nose. The familiar trace of comfort grounded her instantly. Her ears lowered, her body eased. She sniffed the fabric deeply, then pressed her nose against it. Tom stared in disbelief. "You just changed her in seconds." Keanu shook his head gently. "Not changed, redirected. Regulation, not suppression." She still heard the siren. She still felt it. But we gave her somewhere safe to place the energy. He folded the handkerchief carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. Luna, now sitting calmly at his side, tail resting on the floor once more. The last echoes of the siren faded into the distance, leaving the hallway unnaturally quiet. It was as if everyone in earshot had been holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Slowly, doors cracked open, faces peering out from rooms. A resident in a wheelchair stopped in the middle of the corridor, eyes wide from the sudden noise. Even a nurse froze at the far end, clutching a clipboard tight to her chest. All of them had witnessed the flash of panic, and all of them were watching now, surprised that it hadn't exploded into chaos. Tom's chest still heaved as though his body hadn't caught up to the calm yet. He wiped his palms against his scrubs, shaking his head. "I thought for sure she was going to bolt," he muttered. His eyes flicked toward Luna, who now sat in place, calm but alert, her gaze fixed on Keanu. How do you keep her steady when everything's screaming at her to run?" Keanu knelt, bringing himself level with Luna's eyes. His voice was quiet, but clear enough for everyone within earshot. "By giving her something to hold on to," he explained. "When chaos comes, we don't erase it. We don't shout it down, we redirect it, just like tying a rope to a dock. She needed the cinnamon because it reminded her of something safe. He glanced down the hallway, where a few staff members lingered, listening. His tone shifted slightly, meant for them as much as for Tom. This isn't about control, it's about trust. If she knows I'll stay calm, she can let go of the fear. The same works here. Residents don't need us to erase every sound, every memory, every panic. They need us to show them where to place it. Tom exhaled, the tension in his body finally loosening. He crouched beside Luna, mimicking Keanu's gesture by holding out his hand. "Target," he said softly, uncertain. Luna turned her head toward him, then back to Keanu, as if asking for permission. Keanu gave a small nod, and only then did the dog lean her nose toward Tom's palm, pressing lightly. Tom's lips parted in wonder. "She listened to me." "She mirrored your calm," Keanu corrected gently. "You gave her a steady place to look." The resident in the wheelchair who had been watching rolled closer, her frail voice trembling as she spoke. That noise makes me jump every time." But she didn't run. She stayed. Her eyes glistened, not with fear now, but with something close to gratitude. "Maybe I can stay too." The words hung in the air, rippling outward. The staff member with the clipboard lowered her shoulders, her tight grip relaxing. The tension that had seized the hallway began to dissolve. The ambulance had brought disruption, but what lingered was not fear. It was proof that even in chaos, calm could be reclaimed. The hallway, moments earlier braced for an eruption, now carried an air of fragile relief. The residents who had peeked from their doorways lingered, curious, unwilling to turn away from what they had just seen. The siren had rattled the walls, but instead of panic, they had witnessed stillness growing out of it. Keanu rose slowly, letting his movements echo the calm he wanted to leave behind. He didn't announce success, didn't lecture the onlookers. Instead, he let Luna's posture do the teaching. The dog sat relaxed, her tail brushing the tile, eyes soft, body steady. She was the proof no one could deny. Tom rubbed the back of his neck, his voice carrying the unsteady wonder of someone who had just seen something he couldn't explain. "I panicked, and you didn't. I shouted, and you whispered. And somehow she listened to you instead of me." Keanu met his gaze, because shouting would have told her the world was ending. Whispering told her the world was safe. He paused, letting the words sink in, before adding, "It isn't about silencing fear. It's about showing a different rhythm to follow." A door creaked wider nearby. An older man leaned on his walker, his knuckles white. His eyes were still wary, but softer now, drawn by the dog's calm. A nurse hurried forward to steady him, but he raised a hand, shaking his head. "No, let me look," he said. He stood in the doorway, watching Luna breathe. His own shoulders began to drop in time with hers. Carla appeared from farther down the corridor, her sharp heels clicking softly as she approached. Her arms were crossed, but the expression on her face had changed. She had seen the alarm, the near disaster, and she had expected proof of her doubts. Instead, she was confronted with the opposite. Her eyes moved from Luna to the residents watching, to Tom crouched beside the dog. Something unreadable flickered across her face, resistance, but mixed with reluctant acknowledgement. Keanu gave her a nod, not triumphant, not challenging, simply respectful. Then he lowered himself again, pulling the cinnamon-scented handkerchief from his pocket. He held it toward Luna, who sniffed it once more before leaning into his touch. He spoke softly, but everyone nearby could hear. "Safe memory beats chaos, every time." The words settled in the air, not as a speech, but as a fact proven in front of their eyes. No one argued. They couldn't. Tom stood at last, his eyes brighter. "I get it now," he said. "Regulation, not suppression." Keanu smiled faintly. "Exactly." The moment closed with a silence that was not heavy, but steady, the kind that lingered as a lesson. The ambulance had passed, but what remained was stronger. The understanding that calm was possible, even in the loudest storms. The echo of the siren had faded, but its impact remained, not as fear, but as proof. The staff who had lingered in the hallway began to whisper to each other, their eyes darting between Keanu and Luna as though they had just witnessed something impossible. The residents who had peeked from their doors still hovered near the thresholds, unwilling to return inside. It was as if the corridor itself had become a gathering place, alive with questions unspoken. Keanu recognized the moment. A lesson was waiting to be drawn from what had just happened. He let Luna settle into a down position, her body stretched across the floor with calm ownership of the space, then stood upright. His presence was quiet, but centered, the kind that invited attention without asking for it. "Chaos doesn't go away," he said, his voice measured but strong enough to reach everyone listening. "But how we answer it, that's where healing begins." His words carried no theatrics, only calm conviction. He slipped a folded paper from his pocket, unfolded it against the wall, and with a pen, he quickly sketched 3 simple symbols: a flat palm raised, a finger pointing downward, and 2 fingers touching his chest. "These are the 3 anchors we use," he explained, turning the paper so Tom could see clearly. "Sit. Lie still. Look at me." He kept the drawings crude, almost childlike, as if to prove they didn't need sophistication to hold power. Tom stepped forward, brows furrowed with curiosity. "That's it? Just 3? 3 is enough," Keanu replied. "Too many, and you lose clarity. These 3 cover almost every moment you'll face." He crouched beside Luna, lifted his hand flat in the first symbol. "Sit." Luna obeyed instantly, shifting her weight and tucking herself neatly into position. Keanu nodded once, then pointed downward with a steady finger. "Lie still." She slid gracefully to the floor, chin resting flat. Finally, he tapped 2 fingers against his chest. "Look at me." Luna's eyes locked with his, unwavering. The corridor had grown so quiet that even the hum of the lights seemed louder. A few residents clapped softly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine awe. One woman whispered, "She listens like a person." Keanu didn't bask in it. Instead, he turned toward Tom and offered the leash. "Now you." Tom's eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. "Me? In front of everyone?" His gaze darted to the residents watching, to the staff clustered near the far wall, to Carla standing at a distance with her arms crossed tightly. "Because if you can do it here, in front of them, you can do it anywhere." Tom hesitated, staring at the leash in Keanu's hand, as though it were a live wire. His pulse quickened, his palms damp. He shook his head slightly. I don't know if I can do this right. What if she doesn't listen to me?" Keanu's tone didn't waver. "Then she learns from your mistakes, and that's part of the training too. This isn't about perfection, it's about presence. Just try." The residents leaned in, curious, their eyes bright with anticipation. Even the staff had paused their tasks to watch. Tom swallowed hard, then slowly accepted the leash. His hand trembled at first, but he steadied it by remembering the breathing Keanu had taught him earlier. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold again. The rhythm calmed him enough to kneel beside Luna. "Okay, sit," Tom said, lifting his palm in the signal he'd just seen. His voice cracked, but the command was clear. Luna tilted her head, studied him for a moment, then lowered herself into a sit. Tom's eyes widened, relief and joy washing over his face. A smattering of applause came from 2 doorways, and he laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "She actually listened to me." "Good," Keanu encouraged softly. "Now give her the next one." Tom pointed down toward the floor, finger trembling. "Lie still." Luna hesitated for a second, then stretched her body out along the tile, placing her chin flat between her paws. Tom gasped. The residents clapped again, louder this time, and a woman in a wheelchair whispered, "That's amazing." Tom's shoulders loosened, a grin spreading across his face. He tapped 2 fingers to his chest, uncertain. "Look at me." Luna raised her head, locking her gaze with his. The connection hit Tom like a jolt, sudden, powerful, grounding. His smile faltered into something deeper, almost reverent. He whispered, "She's really looking at me." The hallway erupted with soft applause, a ripple of sound that carried encouragement rather than noise. Even the staff member with the clipboard joined in, her skepticism fading into genuine appreciation. At the far end of the corridor, Carla still stood with her arms crossed, but her face betrayed cracks in her armor. She had expected failure. She had expected the dog to ignore Tom, to expose this entire experiment as a gimmick. Instead, she had seen the opposite. A young nurse finding strength in his own breath, a dog mirroring his calm, and residents responding with hope instead of fear. Her lips pressed tight, but her eyes lingered longer than before. She did not move forward, yet she did not walk away. Something inside her was shifting. Tom's confidence grew with each command, but what changed more than anything was the way he carried himself. His shoulders were straighter, his breathing slower, his hands steadier on the leash. The nurse who only moments ago had looked frazzled and overwhelmed now stood in the middle of the corridor with the posture of someone who belonged. Keanu remained nearby, his presence quiet but guiding. He didn't step in to correct Tom's hand signals or adjust his words. He let him own the moment, even the small imperfections. Each signal, each response from Luna belonged to Tom, not to him. That was the lesson. Real leadership came not from showing control, but from giving it away. One of the residents clapped again, the sound sharp but cheerful. Another began to hum under her breath, a tune that made others smile. The mood in the hallway shifted. It was no longer the sterile corridor of a nursing home. It had become something else, an improvised classroom, a stage, a place where people believed they could witness something good. Tom finished the final command once more, tapping his chest. "Look at me." Luna obeyed, with effortless calm, eyes steady on his face. The nurse laughed out loud this time, shaking his head in disbelief. "She trusts me. I didn't think she would." Keanu gave a simple nod. "She trusts you because you slowed down. You gave her your presence. That's all she needed." A hush fell again, but it wasn't heavy. It was full, charged with meaning. The residents returned to their rooms a little lighter, still whispering to each other about what they had seen. The staff exchanged looks that carried a different weight, now not skepticism, but the first hints of belief. Carla stood frozen at the far end, her arms still crossed, but her jaw clenched as if fighting something she could no longer dismiss. She had come expecting disruption, convinced this man and his dog would upset the fragile balance of her schedule. Instead, she was watching her staff learn, her residents smile, and a calmness spread in the very hallway she had sworn to protect from change. For the first time, she did not turn away with sharp words. She stayed, listening, her eyes narrowing not in disdain but in reluctant thought. The cracks in her skepticism widened. She wasn't ready to admit it yet, but the wall was beginning to crumble. And Keanu knew without a single confrontation that this was how transformation began. Evening shadows lengthened as staff guided residents slowly into the common room. Lamps glowed softly in the grand corners, their light warmer than the overhead fluorescents. The shuffle of slippers against linoleum, the faint hum of wheelchairs rolling forward, and the quiet chatter of families filled the space. For once, there was no rush. People gathered as though something different was about to happen. Keanu sat near the front, a simple wooden guitar resting across his lap. Its surface was worn smooth, the kind of instrument that didn't shine but carried a history in its grain. He tuned it gently, plucking each string until the notes settled into a low, soothing hum. Luna lay curled at his feet, already calm, her eyes half closed but alert enough to sense the atmosphere gathering around them. The residents leaned in, curiosity sparking in their faces. Alice had been wheeled in with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She clutched her handkerchief, pressing it lightly to her nose, as though keeping her anchor close. "Mister?" Ben sat in his chair, straighter than earlier, his hands steady enough to rest comfortably on his knees. Around them, a handful of others gathered, faces marked by age, but brightened by anticipation. Keanu struck a gentle rhythm on the guitar, slow and steady, about 60 to 70 beats per minute. The pace matched a calm human heartbeat, subtle enough to soothe, but strong enough to carry through the room. He let the notes breathe, each one hanging before the next arrived, a rhythm of rest rather than performance. The room quieted. Even those who had been whispering hushed themselves as the guitar filled the air. Keanu's eyes stayed lowered, his posture humble, never commanding attention. Yet the music pulled them in, holding them together in a way words could not. A soft voice rose unexpectedly. From the far side of the room, one of the older men began to hum. The melody was shaky at first, unsteady like a candle flame, but it carried a tune familiar to almost everyone present. "You are my sunshine." The words came haltingly, carried more in tone than in volume. Another voice joined, this time Alice's, faint and fragile but clear. She clutched her handkerchief in one hand, her other resting lightly on her blanket. Her lips moved, whispering the lyrics more than singing them. The faintness of her voice made it more powerful, as though the memory of the song itself had stirred something she thought she had lost. "Mr." Ben tapped his knee softly in time with the guitar. The motion was deliberate, not trembling now, but steady. He glanced around as though unsure whether anyone noticed, but no one interrupted. The rhythm was his contribution, his way of being part of the moment without words. Soon, the hum grew louder. Residents who hadn't sung in years found their voices rising. A woman with a frail frame tapped her fingers against her armrest. Another leaned her head back, her eyes closed, mouthing the lyrics. Families nearby began to wipe tears quietly, their hands tightening on the arms of their loved ones. The collective sound filled the common room, fragile but beautiful, each voice layering over the other like threads weaving into a single fabric. The imperfections made it richer. Some voices wavered off pitch, others cracked, but together they created a harmony that carried weight beyond music. Carla stood near the back, watching. Her arms were crossed again, but not tightly. Her lips pressed together, though her eyes betrayed her. She glanced toward the staff station where the medicine board was pinned, tallying nightly calls. Tonight, the numbers were fewer than usual. She noticed it. She couldn't deny it. Something was shifting, not just in this room, but in the rhythm of the building itself. Keanu kept the guitar steady, each chord flowing like a heartbeat. His fingers moved without rush, his head tilted slightly forward as though he were simply a guest keeping time with the room rather than the one guiding it. He let the song belong to them, never pushing his voice above theirs, only offering the framework for their memories to settle into. The voices grew bolder. Some cracked with age, others quivered, but the song swelled until the walls seemed to hold warmth instead of silence. Alice leaned forward in her chair, her blanket sliding from her shoulders as she gripped the handkerchief in one hand, the other tapping against her leg in time. Her lips shaped the words with conviction now, no longer whispers. "Mr." Ben lifted his hand from his knee and clapped it softly against the rhythm. His eyes narrowed but wet, as though the simple beat had pulled him back to a place of safety he hadn't thought he'd ever feel again. He didn't sing, but his chest rose and fell with the collective rhythm, his breath syncing with the group's pulse. A nurse who had been leaning in the doorway began humming too, almost without realizing it. She caught herself, glanced around, then smiled shyly and continued, her voice weaving into the others. Families clasped the hands of their loved ones tighter, tears slipping down cheeks. What had started as a single hum had become something more, a chorus of fragile voices carrying each other. The song reached the final line, "Please don't take my sunshine away," and for a moment, no one breathed. The silence after the last chord hung heavy and sacred. It was as though the entire building had inhaled at once and refused to let the moment go. Then a resident chuckled softly, breaking the stillness with warmth. Another clapped. Soon the room filled with gentle applause, not for a performance, but for themselves, for the fact that they had remembered how to sing together. Keanu lowered the guitar carefully onto his lap and bowed his head, acknowledging the moment without claiming it. He glanced toward Luna, who had remained curled on the floor, her eyes half closed, her breathing calm. She looked like she belonged here, woven into the rhythm of the room. Carla, still standing at the back, stared at the residents with a conflicted expression. She saw Alice's face glowing with memory, saw Mr. Ben steadying his breath, saw the nurses watching with newfound softness. She looked back at the medicine board again. The tally marks from earlier fewer than the nights before. She couldn't pretend not to notice. Her skepticism cracked further. The evidence wasn't in Keanu's words, or even the dog's obedience. It was here, in the way the room itself had changed. The residents were calmer, the staff were breathing easier, and for the first time in years, the air inside the common room didn't feel like waiting. It felt alive. Carla exhaled slowly, her arms uncrossing. She pressed her hand to her chin, deep in thought. She wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but she knew the balance she had fought to protect hadn't been broken. It had been restored. The common room slowly dispersed. Residents wheeled back to their rooms, families helping their loved ones settle for the night. The hum of conversation faded into the softer rhythms of evening. Keanu remained seated with the guitar resting on his lap, his posture relaxed but his attention still present. Luna lay at his feet, her chest rising and falling in calm rhythm, the very picture of the peace the evening had created. Carla lingered in the doorway long after most had gone. Her arms were no longer crossed, though her hands fidgeted with the papers she carried. She stood rooted, watching the scene as if trying to frame it in her mind before she allowed herself to step closer. Finally, she took a breath and moved into the room, her heels clicking softly against the tile. "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice lower than before, carrying none of the sharp sarcasm she had used at the entrance earlier. "Maybe I was wrong." The words felt heavy, almost foreign to her, as if they resisted leaving her mouth. She exhaled slowly. "But how do we maintain this? What happens tomorrow when you walk out that door?" Keanu set the guitar aside gently, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He didn't respond with triumph. Instead, his voice remained steady, practical, carrying the same weight as his breathing exercises earlier. "Small, steady steps," he said. "Not grand events, not a performance. You train the nurses, you set hours, you prioritize the residents who struggle the most. It isn't about creating a show, it's about creating a rhythm that repeats." Carla tilted her head, skeptical but softer now. "That sounds structured." "It has to be," Keanu replied. "Kindness without structure burns out. Programs need bones if they're going to hold up. That's why I call it Pet and Memory. It has 4 pillars: therapy dog training, a visitation calendar, scent memory notebooks, and a resident support fund. 4 simple pieces. Together, they make something sustainable." Carla folded her arms again, but this time the gesture seemed more like protection than defiance. "Therapy dog training? You mean I'd have to let staff train with animals during work hours?" "Yes," Keanu said. "Not as a distraction, but as a tool. 3 hand signals, basic commands. Enough for staff to redirect a resident's anxiety instead of freezing when it happens. They don't need to become trainers. They just need confidence." "And the calendar?" she pressed. "A rhythm," Keanu explained. "Set days when Luna or other therapy dogs visit. Residents know what to expect. Anticipation itself becomes healing. Uncertainty breeds fear, but a calendar gives safety." Carla shifted uncomfortably. "And these notebooks?" "Memory anchors," Keanu said, reaching into his pocket and holding up Alice's handkerchief. "Every resident has scents, objects, small details that pull them back. Staff write them down. Keep a record. That way, when panic hits, they don't have to guess. They go straight to the anchor." Carla stared at the fabric in his hand, recognizing the power it had held over Alice earlier. She swallowed hard, her expression caught between doubt and reluctant admiration. Carla's eyes lingered on the handkerchief as if it were more than fabric, as if it symbolized the thing she had been trying to measure all evening but couldn't. Her fingers tightened around her folder of notes, her practical instincts fighting with the evidence that stood in front of her. "And the fund?" she asked finally. Keanu placed the handkerchief back in his pocket before answering. "For emergencies, for supplies, for a resident who wants to keep a pet but can't afford its care. A small fund creates dignity. It tells them they aren't a burden, they're participants in their own healing." Carla exhaled sharply, her jaw tightening. You're talking about changing the way we run things. Do you realize how many moving parts this home already has? Charts, meds, meals, rotations. If I add one more system, you won't be adding, Keanu interrupted gently, but firmly. You'll be aligning. The rhythm already exists. Residents wake, eat, take medicine, rest, repeat. You're not disrupting that. You're weaving in a new thread, one that steadies everything else. The work won't increase. The panic calls will decrease. His words hit her where she lived, in the numbers. Carla's mind automatically calculated the strain of late-night emergencies, the cost of overworked nurses, the burnout rate she pretended not to see. She looked down, silent for a long moment. Finally, she raised her head, her voice softer, uncertain. And what about me? If this works, what if I lose control of the order I've fought to keep? Keanu met her eyes. His reply came without hesitation. You won't lose control. You'll share it. Control is fragile. Shared rhythm is strong. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. She had watched Alice soften, seen Ben steady, witnessed Tom transform under a few breaths and a leash. Evidence had spoken louder than her skepticism. Yet part of her still clung to the identity of being the gatekeeper. Letting go meant trusting others, and trust had always been her hardest currency. You make it sound simple, she muttered, almost bitter, though her voice lacked venom now. It is simple, Keanu said, but not easy. That's why we do it slowly, small and steady. The phrase echoed in her ears, irritating in its truth. She rubbed her forehead with her fingertips, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, she looked at him not as an intruder, but as a man who had walked into her carefully balanced world and somehow made it breathe again. Maybe, she whispered. With Aster, the word was reluctant, but it cracked open a door inside her. Maybe it could work. Keanu rose slowly, giving her the dignity of silence. He didn't push her further. He didn't need to. The battle wasn't between him and her. It was between her fear and what she had just seen with her own eyes. Carla stood straighter, adjusting her folder as if to remind herself she was still the manager here. But as she turned to leave, her gaze softened on Luna, who lifted her head and wagged her tail once. Carla's lips curved, faintly, before she quickly suppressed it. She walked away, carrying her doubt like armor, but also carrying something new. The weight of undeniable possibility. The nursing home had grown quiet again after the singing in the common room. The lamps were dimmed, the halls calmer, the staff moving at a gentler pace. Keanu lingered near the small office at the end of the corridor, Luna at his side. Carla was inside, standing behind the desk with her folder spread open, reviewing the notes she had taken. Her posture was still guarded, but she no longer wore the sharp mask of skepticism. She looked up when Keanu entered. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't heavy with resistance, but filled with consideration, as though she was weighing her choices carefully. You've given me a lot to think about, Carla said finally, her tone measured. She tapped her pen against the folder. But thinking won't be enough. If this is going to happen, it has to be more than a good idea. It has to live in policy, in structure, in accountability. Otherwise, it will fall apart the moment you're gone. Keanu nodded once. That's why I'm not leaving it to chance. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thin envelope. He placed it on the desk between them, sliding it forward without explanation. Carla's eyes narrowed with suspicion as she picked it up, unfolding the papers inside. Her breath caught as she realized what she was holding. A 12-month sponsorship contract. The language was simple, but precise. An anonymous donor had agreed to cover the costs of training, supplies, and additional staff hours to maintain the Pet and Memory program for 1 full year. Carla looked up sharply. Anonymous? Who would? She stopped mid-sentence, reading his face, the answer clear without being spoken. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she set the papers down carefully. You're not putting your name on this? No, Keanu said quietly. It isn't about me. It's about them. If my name is attached, it becomes a story. If it's anonymous, it becomes a system. Carla stared at him for a long moment, her expression caught between disbelief and reluctant admiration. She was used to people demanding recognition for their contributions, using donations as leverage or publicity. But here he was, stripping away his own credit so the focus would remain where it belonged. She sighed heavily, pressing her hand to the desk. Do you understand what this means? If I sign this, I'm binding myself to the program. If it fails, it's on me, my staff, my reputation, my facility. Keanu's tone carried no pressure. It also means if it succeeds, it belongs to you. To them, not to me. Power doesn't show off. It sustains. It multiplies. It belongs to the people who live with it every day. The words lingered in the small office. Carla leaned back slowly in her chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment, as if trying to breathe through the weight of responsibility. When she lowered her gaze again, her eyes were softer, though still conflicted. Carla picked up her pen again, rolling it between her fingers, staring at the sponsorship contract as if it were heavier than paper. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Her jaw tightened as she read the lines once more, each sentence a reminder of what she would be agreeing to. At last, she set the pen down and leaned forward. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "If I sign this, I won't just be accepting the program. I'll be declaring responsibility for it. The residents, the staff, the board, all of them will look to me." "I don't take that lightly," Keanu nodded, his gaze steady. "And that's why it has to be you. You're the one who knows their names, their habits, their needs. You're not an outsider. You're the anchor." For the first time that evening, Carla let the words soften her posture. She drew in a long breath, then exhaled slowly, as though surrendering to something she had resisted for too long. She signed the paper carefully, her pen pressing firmly against the page, and when she finished, she closed the folder with quiet finality. The sound of the folder snapping shut carried through the small office like a promise. It was done. Keanu inclined his head slightly in respect, then turned to Tom, who had been standing near the doorway the entire time, watching with wide eyes. "Tom," Keanu said gently, "this isn't mine to carry. It belongs here, and someone has to coordinate it." Tom blinked, startled. "Me?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "Yes, you," Keanu said. "You already know the residents. You've learned the signals. You understand what it means to breathe through chaos. That makes you the right one to lead. You'll make mistakes. That's part of it. But you'll grow, and they'll grow with you." Tom swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting at his sides. For a moment he looked overwhelmed, but then the memory of Luna responding to his hand signal flashed across his mind. He remembered the residents clapping, the way Alice had smiled, the way Ben had tapped his knee. Slowly, his shoulders straightened. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steadier now. "I'll take responsibility. I'll train with the staff. I'll make sure this doesn't fade away when the moment passes." Keanu gave him a small nod of approval. "Good. Leadership isn't about being the strongest voice in the room. It's about making sure the rhythm continues, even when you're tired. You'll carry that rhythm here." Carla looked at Tom, studying him carefully. At first, her skepticism rose again, but she caught herself. She had seen his growth in the hallway. She had seen the change when Luna obeyed his hand signals. Finally, she gave him a small nod. "If you're committed, I'll back you. But don't take it lightly. This will ask more of you than you think." "I understand," Tom replied. The three of them stood together in the quiet office, the contract signed, the commitment sealed not with fanfare, but with silence. It was not a victory shouted from rooftops. It was a seed planted, designed to grow roots deep enough to last. The following afternoon carried a gentler light through the nursing home's windows. The sun slanted at an angle that painted the corridor in gold. A softer warmth, than the stark brightness of noon. The air itself felt different, lighter, calmer, touched by the rhythm that had been set the night before. Residents moved slowly, but with less tension. The staff walked with fewer clipped steps. It was subtle, but the change could be felt. Keanu made his way down the hall, with Luna trotting calmly at his side. Each step was measured, his posture relaxed, his eyes open to every small detail that mattered. The smile from a nurse pushing a cart, the wave of a resident leaning on a walker, the faint music still humming in the common room from an old radio. These were signs that the place was breathing differently now. Alice waited near the end of the hallway, her blanket tucked neatly around her shoulders, her wheelchair angled slightly so she could see him approach. On her lap was a small napkin folded carefully around something fragile. Her hands trembled as she held it out, but her face carried the same thin smile she had worn the day before when she remembered her husband's love for cinnamon. "I thought you should have this," she said softly. Her voice wavered but carried pride. She opened the napkin to reveal a single cookie, slightly misshapen, the surface cracked, its edges browned unevenly. It wasn't perfect, but the smell of molasses and cinnamon rose gently into the air, pulling a memory forward. Keanu crouched down so he was lower than her eye level, just as he had before. He accepted the cookie with both hands, treating it not as food, but as a gift beyond price. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was low, reverent. He held it close for a moment, inhaling the faint sweetness. "This is more than a cookie. This is a memory you've chosen to share." Alice's lips quivered, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. "It's from the recipe we made together, back when he was still here. I thought I'd forgotten how, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Somehow I remembered." Luna lifted her head, sniffing at the cookie, tail brushing against the floor in a slow wag. Alice reached down to stroke the dog's head, her fingers gentler now. Not the tentative touches of yesterday, but a confident, loving motion. Keanu smiled softly, still holding the cookie carefully in its napkin. "You didn't just remember, Alice. You reclaimed something. That matters more than anything I could bring." Her hand stilled on Luna's fur, and for the first time in days, her shoulders sank with relief. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes closing briefly as though resting in the memory itself. Behind her, a staff member wiped at her own eyes discreetly, pretending to check paperwork. Even she understood that what Alice had given was far greater than what she had received. As Keanu rose from Alice's side, the quiet shuffling of footsteps approached from down the corridor. "Mr. Ben appeared, guided only slightly by his cane. His frame was steady, his shoulders squared, and his expression carried a strength that hadn't been there the day before. He stopped in front of Keanu, hesitated, then extended his hand. The difference was immediate. Yesterday, his fingers had trembled uncontrollably, the weight of memory refusing to let them be still. Now, his hand was firm, the shake was gone. He looked Keanu in the eye as he offered it. Keanu accepted the handshake without a word, gripping it firmly but gently. The two men stood in silence, the handshake speaking more powerfully than any sentence could. Finally, Ben's voice broke through, rough but sure. "You gave me more than calm," he said. "You gave me proof. I still have control." Keanu inclined his head, his voice quiet. "You always had it. You just needed a place to find it again." Ben's eyes glistened, but he blinked quickly, unwilling to let the tears fall. He squeezed once more, then released the handshake with dignity. Luna brushed her nose against his leg, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small smile. The farewell gathered momentum. Residents waved from their doorways, some calling out simple words of thanks, others offering nods too heavy with emotion for speech. Nurses paused their work to acknowledge the man and the dog walking slowly toward the exit. Tom stood near the station, his eyes brighter, his posture more assured. He raised a hand in salute, not playful but solemn, a gesture of commitment to the role he had accepted. Carla remained in the background, arms folded loosely now instead of tightly. She didn't step forward, but she didn't turn away either. Her eyes followed Keanu and Luna, her thoughts unspoken but written clearly on her face. a reluctant respect, and the beginning of belief. At the glass doors, Keanu paused. He turned back once, bowing his head deeply, not as a performer closing a curtain, but as a guest, showing gratitude to those who had welcomed him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carrying just enough for the nearest residents to hear. He placed a hand briefly on his heart, then straightened. Luna walked calmly at his side as they pushed through the doors. The afternoon sunlight poured across the entryway, catching the glass at just the right angle. For a moment, the hospital's sign reflected perfectly in the doors, its letters bold and clear, framed by the fading glow of the day. Keanu glanced at it, his lips curving into the faintest smile. Not a smile of triumph, but one of quiet assurance. He stepped outside with Luna, leaving behind a hallway that now carried more hope than when he had entered. Inside, the memory of his presence would linger, not as a spectacle, but as a rhythm that had been restored. Weeks passed, and the echoes of Keanu's visit never faded. The program he had quietly planted began to take shape within. The walls of the nursing home. What had started as a single afternoon of calm had grown into a rhythm woven into daily life. The residents felt it first. Their nights became quieter, their breathing easier. Panic attacks that once broke the silence after dark became fewer, replaced by a steadier peace. The Pet and Memory program ran 120 hours each month. Each visit was recorded in the calendar Carla had posted near the nurses' station. The schedule wasn't grand, but it was steady. A few hours each day, woven in alongside meals, medications, and rest times. That steadiness mattered more than spectacle. It told the residents that the calm they had experienced wasn't fleeting. It was part of the structure of their days. Alice was often seen in the lounge, her handkerchief folded neatly in her lap. Sometimes she pressed it to her face, breathing in the faint cinnamon scent. The object had become her anchor, a bridge back to the memories of her kitchen and her late husband. With Luna, or another therapy dog by her side, she carried herself differently now. Her smile came easier, her confusion softened by moments of recognition tied to touch and scent. Mr. Ben took to sitting near the window with other veterans in the home. His tremors did not vanish forever, but they were no longer the master of his body. On calmer days, he tapped his fingers on the table, leading others in rhythm as Tom guided breathing sessions nearby. The man who once avoided touch now rested his hand confidently on Luna's fur, the memory of stillness anchored in him. Tom grew into his new role with a surprising confidence. At first, he struggled with the weight of leadership, but with each session, his voice grew steadier. He became known for gathering residents in small circles and leading them through box breathing. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold again. The rhythm that Keanu had once whispered now belonged to Tom, and the residents mirrored his calm. Nurses who had once scoffed at the idea of dog training now joined in, tapping their chests for "look at me," pointing down for "lie still," smiling when the dogs obeyed. Carla kept her distance in the early weeks, watching more than participating. Yet the numbers on her board told the truth she could not ignore. Nighttime calls for medicine had dropped. Requests for sedatives lessened. Residents who had once needed constant redirection now settled more easily when their anchors were used. She tried to convince herself it was coincidence, but the evidence stacked up with each passing week. Slowly, her posture toward the program shifted from reluctant tolerance to guarded respect. The hallways themselves seemed different. They no longer carried the sharp edge of tension, but the softness of expectation. The shuffle of slippers sounded less hurried, the tones of conversation lighter. The ripple effect was no longer abstract. It was visible, audible, alive in the daily rhythm of the home. The residents embraced the program as if it had always been meant for them. Simple routines turned into rituals. A soft knock at the door announced Luna or another therapy dog arriving for a visit. The residents would lift their hands in expectation, smiles already forming before fur touched their skin. The joy wasn't loud, but it was deep, carried in the ease of their breaths and the steadiness of their heart rates. Alice became known for sharing her cookies on afternoons when she had the energy to bake. The scent of cinnamon drifted down the hallway like a signal. pulling both staff and residents together. It wasn't about the cookies themselves. It was about what they represented, a piece of memory brought into the present, something that could be savored by everyone. Mr. Ben began teaching other residents the rhythms he had once struggled to hold. He would tap the beat on the arm of his chair, nodding to others to follow along. When they did, the room filled with a subtle unity. He never spoke about his war memories, but he no longer had to. His silence carried a strength that the others understood. Tom's growth was perhaps the most remarkable. The nurse who once panicked at the sound of a siren now stood in the center of the common room, steady and confident, guiding staff and residents through the same breathing exercises Keanu had taught him. His voice no longer cracked. His hands no longer trembled. He had become the coordinator not just in name, but in presence. Under his lead, the program flourished. Carla kept her promise. She signed every report with the same sentence: "I am responsible for implementation." She didn't flaunt her shift in perspective, but her actions told the truth. She defended the hours set aside for the program, adjusted staff schedules when necessary, and even reminded the board of its importance during budget meetings. She remained practical, but now her practicality included compassion, not as an afterthought, but as part of the system. The ripple effect spread further than the residents. Families noticed the difference. When they visited, they saw their loved ones calmer, more engaged, less isolated. Letters of gratitude began arriving at the nursing home's office, some written in shaky handwriting by residents themselves, others by children and grandchildren who couldn't believe the change they witnessed. Through it all, Keanu's name was rarely spoken. He had left no plaque, no framed certificate, no public recognition. Yet his presence lingered in every calm breath, every steady hand, every softened night. His impact lived not in memory of the man himself, but in the rhythm he left behind. The Pet in Memory program was no longer an experiment. It was part of the nursing home's life, as natural as medicine rounds and meal service. The hallways, once filled with echoes of restlessness, now carried a quieter, steadier tone. Keanu had gone, but the rhythm remained proof that true power doesn't shine in moments of applause. It endures in the silence that follows, steady and alive. Carla sat at her desk late in the evening, the quiet of the nursing home pressing in around her. The building had settled into its nightly rhythm. The hallways were dim, the rooms hushed, the air filled only with the soft murmur of televisions and the faint hum of machines. It was the time of night she once dreaded the hours, when residents grew restless, when her phone rang endlessly with calls for help, when her staff wore exhaustion like a second skin. But tonight was different. The board on the wall told her so. She picked up her logbook and flipped through the most recent pages. The notes, written in her careful hand, showed fewer disruptions. She paused over one entry circled in ink. Ben slept through the night. It was a simple sentence, but its weight was enormous. For months, even years, Ben's tremors and nightmares had broken the silence again and again. Staff had rushed to soothe him, sometimes with medication, sometimes with hurried comfort. But now, the entry told a new story. The night had passed in peace. On the desk in front of her lay Alice's handkerchief. It had been returned to the staff after being washed, still faintly carrying the scent of cinnamon. Carla picked it up carefully, almost reverently, as though it might break in her hand. She pressed it to her face, inhaling softly. The smell was faint, but distinct. And in that scent, she understood. It wasn't just fabric. It was memory. Alice's memory, now preserved as a tool. She set the handkerchief back down and opened a second notebook, this one dedicated to what she called memory anchors. Each resident had a page. Alice's listed cinnamon, molasses, and the sound of a ticking kitchen clock. Ben's listed Luna's fur, the low hum of a guitar, and the steady rhythm of 4-count breathing. Others had anchors too: lavender lotion, the faint ring of a church bell, a tune hummed decades ago. These notes weren't trivial. They had become essential. Carla leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Only weeks ago, she had dismissed the idea outright. She had seen therapy animals as a nuisance, a disruption, An indulgence with no place in her tightly run system. Now she found herself scheduling weekly memory scent sessions. Sessions where residents were paired with their anchors and guided through moments of calm. She wasn't just tolerating the program anymore, she was maintaining it. She thought back to the night Keanu had first walked in, his calm voice clashing with her sarcasm at the door. "What use is a therapy dog here?" she had said. She cringed at the memory now, not because she was embarrassed by her doubt, but because she could see how narrow her vision had been. She had been protecting order when what the residents needed was peace. Order kept things moving. Peace kept them alive. Her pen hovered over the logbook as she considered what to write next. Slowly, she added a line beneath the last entry. Alice sang again today. She underlined it twice. Carla closed the logbook and rested her hands on top of it. The weight of her own handwriting grounded her. She had spent years filling notebooks with numbers, tallies, and schedules. They had kept the building running, kept the staff accountable, and kept the board satisfied. But none of those figures had ever felt alive the way these entries did. They weren't just metrics. They were stories of people reclaiming pieces of themselves. She stood, taking Alice's handkerchief with her, and walked down the quiet hallway. The staff moved gently through their rounds, but the air was calm. She passed Mr. Ben's door and peeked in. He was asleep, his chest rising in a steady rhythm. No trembling hands, no cries in the night. The sight made her pause, her throat tightening with something she hadn't expected: gratitude. Not toward herself, not even toward Keanu, but toward the proof that change was possible. Farther down, she found Tom in the lounge with 2 residents still awake. He was seated in a small circle, his voice steady as he guided them through breathing. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4. The residents followed his lead, their eyes closing, their bodies relaxing with each cycle. Carla watched silently from the doorway, unnoticed, and something inside her shifted. She had once doubted Tom, worried he was too young, too inexperienced, too easily flustered. Now she saw a leader forming in real time, shaped not by authority, but by trust. Returning to her office, she sat again and placed the handkerchief back on the desk. She stared at it, remembering her old words, her biting remark at the entrance. "Don't mess things up with your show." The sarcasm that had once felt like armor now felt like a wound. She realized she had used doubt to protect herself from disappointment. If she never believed in anything new, nothing could fail her. But now, sitting with the evidence of fewer panic calls, steadier nights, and residents humming songs they had long forgotten, she knew doubt had been a shield that kept her from seeing hope. Carla picked up her pen again and opened a fresh page in the logbook. At the top, she wrote, "Weekly memory scent sessions." Beneath it, she outlined a schedule Tuesday afternoons for Alice and the other women who responded to baking scents. Thursday mornings for veterans like Ben, paired with music and rhythm. She listed staff who would assist, with Tom's name circled as the lead coordinator. When she finished, she leaned back and let the sight of the page wash over her. For the first time in her career, her role felt less like controlling and more like stewarding. She wasn't guarding a fragile order anymore. She was tending to a rhythm that could outlast her. Authority had shifted into responsibility, and responsibility had become care. She whispered into the quiet room, almost to herself. "Maybe I wasn't wrong. Maybe I was just late to believe." The words settled around her, not heavy but freeing. She closed the logbook gently, her decision made. From this point forward, the Pet and Memory program was no longer an experiment in her nursing home. It was a foundation, and she would guard it not as a skeptic, but as its steward. The nursing home had slipped into its evening routine. Dinner trays had been cleared, residents were tucked into their rooms, and the halls grew quieter with every passing minute. Most of the staff were finishing their shifts, gathering coats, and heading out into the cool night air, but Tom remained behind. He lingered in the common room with Luna, who had stretched herself across the floor like a soft rug. The guitar leaned against the wall, untouched tonight, but the memory of its steady rhythm still lingered in Tom's mind. He crouched down in front of Luna, leash coiled loosely in his hand, and took a deep breath. His shift was over, yet he stayed because something in him had changed. He raised his palm, fingers straight. Sit. Luna tilted her head, then lowered herself neatly onto her haunches. Tom smiled, the small victory warming him more than a full night's rest ever had. He had given the command earlier in the day during group sessions, but this was different. Now it was just him and the dog. No audience, no residents clapping. This was practice not for recognition, but for growth. He pointed toward the ground, his voice steady. Lie still. Luna slid down, stretching her body against the cool tile, chin resting flat. Tom watched her breathing slow, and without realizing it, his own breathing matched hers. The rhythm was steady, grounding. He tapped 2 fingers against his chest, leaning forward. Look at me. Luna lifted her head, eyes locking onto his with unwavering attention. Tom felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders at that moment. The exhaustion that had been his constant companion since his first day at the nursing home seemed to dissolve under her gaze. For the first time, he didn't feel like just a nurse scrambling to keep up. He felt like a guide, a steady presence, someone capable of giving more than medication or schedules. He exhaled, smiling faintly. You really trust me now, don't you? Luna's tail thumped once against the floor, a silent answer that filled Tom with a quiet pride. Behind him, the lights in the hallway dimmed as the automatic timers clicked on. The building settled deeper into night, but Tom remained, repeating the commands again and again. Each repetition was smoother, his gestures clearer, his voice more confident. The young nurse who had once panicked at the sound of a siren now found himself calm, deliberate, even patient. As he practiced, Carla passed by the doorway. She stopped, leaning lightly against the frame, watching him in silence. The sight struck her this was not the frazzled, overworked nurse she had once doubted. This was someone growing into leadership, shaping himself through discipline and care. She didn't interrupt, didn't announce her presence. She simply allowed herself a small smile before walking away, certain that the program was in capable hands. Tom didn't see her. He only knew that for the first time in years, he felt awake, alive, more than his exhaustion. He felt like a healer. The following week brought more opportunities for Tom to test himself. He no longer hid in the background of group sessions waiting for Keanu's guidance. Instead, he gathered small groups of residents and staff standing at the center of the common room with Luna at his side. His voice, once tentative, carried confidence now. Let's begin with breathing, he said one morning, his tone calm but strong enough to reach the edges of the circle. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold again. He demonstrated with his own breath, shoulders rising and falling in rhythm. The residents followed, their chests lifting together like waves, rolling in sync. Nurses mirrored the pattern too, their pens and charts set aside. Tom watched the effect ripple outward. Faces softened, shoulders lowered. Tension bled from the room. He smiled faintly, realizing the power wasn't in the technique alone, it was in the connection it built. For once, he wasn't just managing tasks, he was leading people into calm. After the breathing, he demonstrated the hand signals. Sit. He lifted his palm. Luna obeyed instantly. The residents clapped softly, impressed. Tom chuckled and pointed to the ground. Lie still. Luna stretched across the floor, chin down. He tapped his chest with 2 fingers. Look at me. Her gaze locked onto him, steady and unwavering. Anyone can learn these, Tom said, turning back to the group. And anyone can use them. That's the point. We don't need to be experts. We just need to be present. Carla, standing in the back, took notes quietly. She watched the staff mimic the hand signals, their movements clumsy at first, then steadier. The residents laughed when a nurse gave the wrong gesture, and Luna cocked her head in confusion. The laughter wasn't mocking, it was healing. For the first time in months, the common room felt alive, not just with routine, but with joy. That night, Tom stayed late again. The halls were dim, and the building hummed with its usual quiet, but he returned to the common room with Luna. He practiced the signals in silence, repeating them until his body no longer had to think. Sit, lie still, look at me. He timed them with his breathing, his rhythm syncing with hers. The exhaustion that used to weigh him down after every shift no longer felt the same. He was still tired, but it was the satisfying fatigue of someone building something, not the weariness of someone barely keeping afloat. At one point, he sat cross-legged on the floor beside Luna, stroking her fur slowly. "You know," he whispered, "I used to think I wasn't enough for this job. Too green, too weak. But you taught me otherwise." His voice cracked slightly, but he smiled. "Keanu gave me the tools, but you gave me the courage to use them." Luna's tail brushed against his leg, her breathing slow and steady, grounding him once more. Tom closed his eyes and let the silence settle over him. He wasn't the same nurse he had been before Keanu arrived. He was something more. He had become a healer. The on-call room had never been a place of comfort. Its walls were plain, its furniture functional, its air heavy with the weight of long nights and endless alarms. For years, the staff had entered that small space with exhaustion pressing down, bracing themselves for the hours ahead. But something had changed. Above the desk, taped to the wall in simple handwriting, was a note. The paper was unremarkable, lined from an ordinary notebook, the ink a steady black. Yet its words carried a weight that transformed the room. Slow is fast for the heart. No signature, no flourish, just the sentence written in Keanu's steady hand, left behind after his time at the home. Some of the staff had seen him write it, his head bent over the desk in quiet concentration before smoothing the tape across the page. Others discovered it only afterward, surprised to find something so small in a place usually reserved for charts and reminders. But soon, everyone knew it was there. The nurses began to glance at it when they entered the room for their night shifts. At first it was casual, almost subconscious. Their eyes flicked to the words before picking up their schedules. But over time, the note became more than writing on a wall. It became a rhythm they carried with them into the halls. Tom was the first to speak openly about it. One evening, after a long shift, he sat in the room with his head tilted back, staring at the note. Another nurse came in, her shoulders tense, her sigh heavy. He nodded toward the wall and said quietly, "Read it." She looked up, muttered the words aloud, and paused. The line seemed too simple at first, but as she repeated it, her breathing slowed. She set her clipboard down and leaned against the desk, whispering, "Maybe he's right." From that night on, the note became ritual. Nurses whispered it under their breath before walking into tense rooms. Care assistants repeated it to themselves when residents became restless. Even Carla, who once dismissed such gestures, found herself glancing at it during her late-night rounds. The words steadied her in ways she couldn't admit aloud. The effect was subtle but undeniable. Shifts that once spiraled into chaos now unfolded with steadier pacing. Staff moved slower, but their work became more efficient, their decisions clearer. They realized that rushing often created mistakes, while calm presence allowed them to handle more with less strain. The note reminded them that the heart, whether of a patient, a resident, or a nurse, could not be forced. It needed rhythm, not speed. Keanu was no longer in the building, but his presence lingered in that sentence. Unlike a plaque or a framed award, the note didn't draw attention to him. It drew attention to the work, to the people, to the rhythm of healing that remained after he left. Weeks passed, and the note above the desk grew worn at the corners. The tape peeled slightly from one edge, curling from the moisture of countless cups of coffee left nearby. Yet no one replaced it. No one laminated it or tried to make it permanent. They left it exactly as Keanu had taped it, ordinary, fragile, but powerful. Staff began to share small stories of how the words carried them through the hardest moments. One nurse described how, during a late-night shift, a resident had woken in panic, shouting at shadows that weren't there. Normally, she would have rushed in with medication or tried to quiet him quickly. But that night, she remembered the note. She slowed her breathing first, placed her hand gently on the resident's shoulder, and whispered reassurance. Within minutes, he calmed enough to rest again. She returned to the on-call room, touched the edge of the note, and wrote in her own logbook, "Slow really was fast tonight." Another aide recalled walking into Alice's room when she became confused, searching for her husband. Instead of correcting her sharply, he slowed his pace, guided her back to her chair, and handed her the cinnamon handkerchief from her memory anchor list. The scent steadied her, and she hummed herself back into calm. The aide later admitted that he'd glanced at the note beforehand, letting it remind him that haste never brought peace. Tom, more than anyone, leaned into the message. On long nights, when exhaustion pressed heavy, he would sit in the on-call room, staring at the note before rounds. He repeated the words, under his breath, like a prayer. "Slow is fast for the heart." They reminded him that he was no longer just surviving his shifts, he was shaping the rhythm of the home, setting the tone for others to follow. Each time he led breathing sessions or taught the hand signals, he carried that sentence like a compass. Even Carla, who had once dismissed Keanu's presence as a disruption, found herself quietly relying on the words. She didn't say it aloud, but in the privacy of her office, she admitted to herself that the sentence had softened her approach. When staff brought her problems, she no longer snapped for quick fixes. She listened longer, let the silence stretch, and answered with solutions steadier than before. She realized leadership wasn't about barking orders, it was about setting a rhythm others could trust. One night, during an unusually heavy storm, the power flickered, and the halls filled with nervous murmurs from residents, startled awake. The staff hurried, unsure if the backup systems would hold. Carla walked into the on-call room, glanced at the note, and spoke it aloud to everyone gathered there. "Slow is fast for the heart." The words settled them. The staff spread out, with calmer steps, speaking softer, guiding residents gently back to bed. By the time the power returned, the halls were quiet again. The note became more than advice. It became the quiet presence of Keanu himself, lingering not as a memory of a celebrity, but as the simple wisdom of a man who had listened, breathed, and acted with compassion. He had walked out the doors without seeking credit, yet left behind something the staff reached for every night. It didn't matter that the ink was fading. It didn't matter that no one outside the home would ever know it existed. For those inside, the words had become a lifeline. They were proof that healing wasn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about the quiet reminders taped to a wall, whispering that the fastest way to peace was to slow down, breathe, and let the heart catch up. The nursing home settled into a new rhythm, one that carried the imprint of every lesson learned. What had once been halls filled with hurried footsteps and anxious voices now moved to a gentler pace, like a steady current guiding everyone forward. The change wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, but it was unmistakable. The reflection that lingered above it all was simple, yet powerful. True strength is never about how loudly one commands attention. It lies in the ways we protect the peace of others, in the choices we make to slow down when the world demands speed, and in the courage to hold space for the fragile moments of healing. Keanu's time at the home had left no banners, no speeches, no headline-grabbing scenes, but it had left a pulse, a rhythm, a reminder of how small actions could ripple outward into something lasting. Everywhere in the home, signs of change could be seen. Alice, who once sat confused by the window, had found joy in baking again. On one bright morning, she was seen in the small kitchenette, rolling dough with flour on her hands, humming softly. When she pulled out the tray of cookies, the scent of cinnamon filled the air. It wasn't just food, it was memory, anchored in peace, shared with others who now gathered around her with smiles and laughter. For her, baking had become more than a pastime. It was a return to a piece of herself that had been missing. Mr. Ben, the veteran whose trembling hands had silenced the room the day he first touched Luna, found himself stronger. He still carried his battles, but he carried them differently now. One afternoon, as Tom passed by, Ben raised his hand, not shaking, and gave a firm salute. Tom stopped, stunned for a moment, before returning the gesture with tears in his eyes. That small act spoke more than words ever could. It was a declaration that the man who had once been trapped by his memories had found a measure of steadiness again. Carla, too, walked a changed path. Once guarded and skeptical, she now led staff meetings with a new tone. Her voice carried not just authority, but care. She brought notebooks filled with observations, encouraging others to share what had worked in the past week. She asked her team to pause before rushing decisions, to listen more deeply, to remember that healing often arrived in quiet moments. Her leadership no longer leaned on doubt or resistance. It leaned on trust, built from the lessons she had once dismissed. Through it all, Keanu's presence lived not in recognition, but in action. The camera of memory lingered on him one last time, walking with Luna down a quiet street at dusk. The sky stretched wide above him, painted with the fading colors of the day. He moved without fanfare, no spotlight following, only the soft sound of Luna's paws against the pavement. For him, this was enough. To leave behind a place steadier than before. To hand the work to others who could continue it, that was the true measure of impact. As the sun lowered and the sky shifted into twilight, the streets outside the nursing home reflected a calm similar to the one inside. Keanu walked steadily, Luna trotting beside him, her ears flicking at the evening sounds. There was no crowd to follow, no applause waiting at the corner, no recognition flashing in cameras. Just the soft rhythm of footsteps and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the seeds he had planted would continue to grow without him. Inside the home, the impact carried forward, in the small, almost invisible gestures of the people left behind. Nurses touched the note on the wall before heading into long nights, repeating its words like a mantra. Alice baked cookies for residents who had forgotten their own birthdays, the scent of cinnamon filling the halls with comfort. Mr. Ben walked slower now, but with steadier steps, often pausing to offer others encouragement in his gravelly voice. And Carla, the manager who had once doubted everything, now organized scent memory sessions as a weekly routine, logging results with care and even pride. Tom, standing in the middle of it all, grew more confident with each passing day. He no longer looked like the tired young nurse drowning under the weight of too much responsibility. He looked like someone who had found his calling, guiding others through breathing exercises, teaching hand signals with patience, and reminding his colleagues that presence mattered more than speed. His leadership had bloomed not because Keanu stayed, but because Keanu had trusted him enough to leave. The final reflection circled back with quiet strength. Power is not found in showing off, but in protecting the peace of others. That was the thread tying each moment together: the music in the common room, the trembling hand that steadied against Luna's fur, the cookies that smelled of love, the note taped to the wall. Each piece carried the same truth. Lives are not always healed by grand gestures, but by tender moments handled with care. The closing montage lingered on these images, Alice smiling as she handed out her cinnamon cookies, Mr. Ben tapping his knee in time with a gentle hum, no longer shaking. Carla leading her staff with calm steadiness, her pen moving across the logbook with deliberate strokes. Tom crouched beside Luna, demonstrating a hand signal to a group of new aides, his face lit by quiet confidence. And above it all, the note remained on the wall, its ink fading, but its meaning growing stronger each day. The last image returned to Keanu. He walked under the fading sky, the streetlights flickering on one by one. Luna stayed close, her leash loose in his hand. He glanced back once, not to claim credit, but to ensure the place he had left behind was still standing strong. Then he faced forward again, disappearing into the dusk. The story closes with an invitation not just to remember, but to act. If you have ever witnessed a pet bring peace to someone in pain, if you have seen how a gentle touch can steady a storm, then share this incredible story in the comments below. And if you believe that tender moments can change long nights, subscribe to the channel so these stories can continue to reach those who need them most.